Martin Keller stood frozen in the doorway, his hand trembling lightly on the file clasp. When he saw Emilia, he tightened his grip, not on the folder, but on his voice. "Emilia," he said, eyes locked on hers. "Come in for a moment." She paused. Just 1 second, but in that instant, her gaze made him feel small. And he hated that feeling. Inside the office, the weak hum of fluorescent lights cast a sterile glow over piles of unfinished paperwork. Martin didn't sit. He feared if he did, he wouldn't have the strength to stand back up. "We've decided to terminate your contract," he said, forcing the words out. No softening, no excuses, even if each syllable scraped its way up his throat. Emilia blinked. He saw her lips part before she spoke. "What? What did I do?" Martin crossed his arms, his eyes dropping to the open file on his desk, a document no one was really reading. "You're no longer aligned with our service direction." She laughed. Not the laugh he'd hoped for, not nervous, not relieved. It was sharp, dry, like a razor dragged across skin. "I've been here almost 3 years. Never missed a shift. Never been late. What kind of service direction are we talking about?" He didn't answer right away. Not because he lacked one, but because the real answer would make him look worse than silence ever could. "You can collect your final paycheck on Friday." As he said it, he avoided her eyes. Not out of fear, but out of shame. Even if he'd never used that word. "This is because of the customer last night, isn't it?" Her voice cracked slightly. Martin didn't move. Yes, it was because of that customer. Because of the kind of power Martin had never dared to challenge. Because the world bowed more easily to names than to fairness. And today, he had chosen to bow. Emilia unfastened her apron and set it on the chair.
"No slamming. No theatrics."
Just a quiet motion that choked him more than any accusation could. Before leaving, she turned. "You know this is wrong." He didn't respond. Just the slightest nod, so faint he wasn't sure if he'd meant to do it, or if a draft from the door had nudged his head forward. But deep down, Martin Keller knew. She was right. Emilia Novak had never been one to seek trouble. She didn't like arguments, didn't make a fuss. To Emilia, living kindly, working hard, and treating others with decency were simple principles she was raised on. For nearly 3 years, Lancaster Grill had been her place. A modest diner tucked quietly on the east side of Cologne, wedged between a gas station and a laundromat. Not fancy, but warm. A place where truck drivers stopped for coffee, families gathered for Sunday breakfast, and the servers remembered your usual order even before your name. The hours were long, the pay barely enough, and the manager mostly indifferent. But Emilia stayed. She had bills to pay, rent for a tiny 1-bedroom flat that always stressed her out. And more importantly, her younger brother Leo was in his 2nd year of university. He didn't know she was the one sending money for books and groceries every month, just saw his bank balance grow slightly, like a small miracle. Emilia didn't complain. She took double shifts, smiled at rude customers, and tolerated coworkers who saw kindness as weakness. She had witnessed many moments that made her heart sink, like Claudia Stein, a senior waitress who only treated customers with money nicely, or Lucas Meyer, the young waiter who avoided tables that didn't look worth serving. It wasn't about tips. It was about who belonged in the kind of space some at the diner thought they should have. Emilia hated that. But speaking up wasn't easy. Once, she casually remarked that a customer had waited too long because Claudia was glued to her phone. Claudia didn't shout, she just glanced coldly and said, "Emilia, no one's paying you extra to play the saint." That was enough to silence her, for a while. Until that evening, when everything changed. That Wednesday night was quieter than usual, a calm evening Emilia didn't mind at all. Fewer customers meant fewer complaints, fewer problems, and fewer fake smiles from coworkers who were only kind when they had to be. Emilia was restocking the sugar jars behind the counter when the bell jingled. An older black man stepped inside. Neatly dressed, a bit worn but tidy, button-down shirt, slacks. He walked slowly, confidently, but with a hint of caution, like someone who was used to not being welcomed. And just as Emilia had predicted, her co-worker's reaction was swift and icy. Claudia didn't even look up from her phone. Lucas gave a quick glance, blank-eyed, then turned back to chatting with another server near the drink station. No greeting. No welcome to Lancaster Grill. Just silence. Emilia felt the air in the diner grow heavy. Part of her wanted to stay quiet, as always, a form of self-protection. But when she looked at him, still standing patiently, as if offering them a chance to do the right thing, she knew she couldn't. She wiped her hands quickly, grabbed a menu, and stepped forward. "Good evening, sir," Emilia said, gently but firmly. "Just one tonight." The man looked up and met her eyes. His gaze softened. "Yes, young lady," he replied. His voice was deep, warm, and calm. "Right this way, please." Emilia led him to a table by the window. "Would this seat be all right?" "Very good," he nodded and sat down. She handed him the menu and pulled a pen from behind her ear. "Can I get you something to drink while you decide?" "Coffee." "Black coffee," he nodded again. "Right away," Emilia smiled and walked off. She brewed the coffee herself, placed it on a tray, and could feel Claudia and Lucas watching her, curious, sneering, waiting for her to mess up. She set the cup in front of him, still smiling. He looked around the diner and asked quietly, just for her to hear, "Are you the only one working here tonight?" Emilia understood instantly. She glanced toward Claudia, whispering to Lucas. They weren't even trying to hide their mockery. "Sometimes it feels that way," she replied, half joking. He chuckled softly and opened the menu. "What's good here?" She tilted her head in thought. "If you want something hearty, the beef stew is solid. But the grilled salmon, that's my favorite." "You guarantee it?" He raised an eyebrow. "Absolutely." "Then the salmon it is," he smiled. Emilia noted the order and headed for the kitchen. As she passed the counter, she heard Claudia mutter, "What a waste of time." Emilia clenched her jaw but said nothing. When she returned to the table with a fresh pot of coffee, the mood in the diner had shifted, subtly but clearly. Claudia was watching her sharply. Lucas kept sneaking glances. Even Martin Keller, the manager, poked his head out of the office, observed for a moment, then slipped back in as if nothing had happened. A strange tightness rose in Emilia's chest. Something she couldn't name right then. She only knew one thing: she had just drawn a line. And maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of a whole new chapter. That Wednesday night was quieter than usual, a calm evening, the kind Emilia Novak truly didn't mind. Fewer customers meant fewer complaints, fewer mishaps, and fewer fake smiles from coworkers who were only kind when it suited them. Emilia was behind the counter, carefully refilling the sugar jars, when the doorbell jingled. An older black man stepped in. His clothes were neat, slightly worn but tidy, a button-down shirt, slacks. He walked slowly, confidently, but with a hint of caution, like someone well accustomed to not being welcomed. And just as Emilia had expected, her co-worker's reaction was swift and cold. Claudia Stein didn't even look up from her phone. Lucas Meyer cast a glance his way, empty-eyed, then turned back to chatting with another co-worker near the drink station. Not a single greeting. No one said, "Welcome to Lancaster Grill." Only silence. Emilia felt the air in the diner thicken. A part of her wanted to stay quiet, as she usually did, a form of self-preservation. But when she looked back at him, the customer still standing there patient, as if giving them a chance to do the right thing, she knew she couldn't. She quickly wiped her hands on a napkin, grabbed a menu, and stepped forward. "Good evening, sir," Emilia said, her voice soft but firm. "Just one tonight." The man looked up and met her gaze. His eyes softened. "Yes, young lady," he replied, voice deep, warm, and calm. "Right this way, please." Emilia led him to a table by the window. "Will this seat be all right?" "Very good," he said, sitting down. She handed him the menu, pulling a pen from behind her ear. "Can I get you something to drink while you decide?" "Coffee." "Black coffee," he nodded. "Right away," Emilia smiled and walked off. She brewed the coffee herself, placed the cup on a tray, fully aware of Claudia and Lucas's eyes following her, curious, disdainful, waiting for her to make a mistake. She placed the cup in front of the customer, still smiling. He looked around the diner and then asked softly, just enough for her to hear, "Are you the only one working here tonight?" Emilia understood him immediately. She glanced over at Claudia, whispering to Lucas. They weren't even trying to hide their derision. "Sometimes it feels that way," she replied, half joking. He chuckled softly and opened the menu. "What's good here?" She tilted her head in thought. If you want something hearty, the beef stew is solid. But the grilled salmon, that's my favorite. You guarantee it? He raised an eyebrow. Absolutely, she said. Then the salmon, he smiled. Emilia jotted down the order and headed toward the kitchen. As she passed the counter, she heard Claudia mutter, "Waste of time." Emilia clenched her jaw, but said nothing. When she returned to the table with a fresh pot of coffee, the mood in the diner had shifted, subtly but undeniably. Claudia watched her with sharp eyes. Lucas continued glancing over from a distance. Even Martin Keller, the manager, poked his head out of the office, observed for a moment, then withdrew as if he hadn't seen anything at all. A strange tightness rose in Emilia's chest. Something she couldn't yet name. She only knew she had just drawn a line. And maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of an entirely new chapter. Emilia Novak barely slept. She tossed and turned all night, her mind spinning with mocking glances, whispered remarks, and the sharp look Claudia gave her as she walked toward the kitchen. She told herself she was imagining it, that she had simply done the right thing. She had served a customer, just like always. But the unease refused to leave her. The next morning, the sky was still a dull gray as Emilia pulled into the back lot of Lancaster Grill. The morning chill crept through her thin coat and made her shiver. She gripped her worn apron tightly and glanced toward Martin Keller's car, already parked in its usual spot. She took a deep breath and walked inside. But instead of the usual busy energy of the morning shift, with Claudia chatting at the counter and Lucas joking with the kitchen crew, there was an eerie silence. Claudia stood by the coffee machine with her arms crossed, eyes like knives. Lucas leaned against the wall, wearing a smirk. No one said a word. Just as Emilia stepped through the doorway, the office door swung open. Martin Keller appeared, his face stiff, his eyes locked directly on her. "Emilia," he said flatly. "Come in for a moment." Her heart sank. She didn't need to guess. She already knew what was coming. The office was small and dim, cluttered with paperwork under flickering fluorescent light. Martin stood behind the desk, arms crossed, a folder open in front of him, though neither of them looked at it. "We've decided to terminate your contract," he said bluntly.
No preamble. No softening.
Emilia blinked. It took her a few seconds to fully process the words. "What?" she asked, stunned. "What did I do?" Martin didn't blink. "You no longer align with our service standards." Emilia let out a bitter laugh. "I've worked here nearly 3 years. Never missed a shift. Never been late. What service standards exactly?" "You can collect your final paycheck on Friday," Martin said, avoiding her gaze. "Because I served that customer last night?" Her voice trembled now. No one answered. But Martin's silence said everything. Emilia stood still for a moment. Then she unfastened her apron, placed it gently on the chair, and turned to leave. At the doorway, she paused and looked back, her voice like sharpened steel. "You know this is wrong." Martin didn't reply. He gave a slight nod, or maybe it was the wind brushing his shoulder. No one could say for sure. Outside, Claudia was still standing, that cruel smile hanging at the corner of her lips. Lucas tried to mask his satisfaction by pretending to wipe the counter. They had waited for this moment. And now they thought they had one. Emilia said nothing. She held her head high, walked past them, and pushed open the cold door into the freezing air. In her hands, she carried nothing. No job. No reason.
No explanation.
But in her heart, a fire had begun to smolder. Emilia sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her breaths were short and fast, and part of her just wanted to scream, to let out the choking frustration. 3 years of hard work. 3 years of enduring snide remarks, rude customers, and coworkers who were more like silent enemies. And all of it thrown away, just because of one simple act, treating someone with kindness? It felt like someone had kicked over everything she'd built and stomped it into the ground. Her phone rang. Emilia glanced at the screen. An unfamiliar number. She hesitated. Could be the bank. Could be a wrong number. Or, it could be something important. She answered. "Hello." A deep, warm male voice came through the line. "Ms. Novak." "Yes." Her voice was hoarse with emotion. "This is Richard Lorenz. I believe you remember me, the man you served last night at Lancaster Grill. Emilia sat up straighter. Yes. I remember. Do you have a minute? His tone was calm, but there was a sharpness behind it. Yes, of course. I heard you were let go. Emilia let out a bitter laugh. Word travels fast. There was a pause. I know, because I own the Lancaster restaurant chain. Silence swallowed the space inside her car. You what? Emilia asked, not sure she'd heard correctly. I'm the owner. Last night I was there undercover, as I often do at my other branches. I wanted to see how the staff treats customers, when they don't know they're being watched. Emilia stared at the windshield, struggling to process what was happening. And I saw enough, Richard continued. I saw how the others ignored me. I saw the look in their eyes when you walked over to me. You were the only one who did the right thing. Emilia inhaled sharply. Then why didn't you step in? Why let them fire me? Because I needed to see what they would do when no one was watching, Richard replied without hesitation. And they revealed themselves. Emilia was silent. A flood of mixed emotions rose in her chest: anger, relief, disbelief. So now you're calling me to? I'm calling to offer you your job back, Richard said, as the new manager of Lancaster Grill. Once again, Emilia was speechless. You're serious? I fired Martin this morning. And I need someone I can trust, someone who understands what fairness really means. Someone like you. Emilia's heart pounded so hard it hurt. I'm not sure I can be a manager. You can. And you'll do it well, Richard said firmly. I'll support you. But you're the one I want leading that place. Emilia closed her eyes for a second, took a deep breath. She thought of Claudia, Lucas, and their smug looks. She thought of the 3 years of biting her tongue, of pushing forward. And now, a chance to change everything. She opened her eyes. I'll do it. Richard smiled on the other end. Good. See you at 8 a.m. tomorrow. When the call ended, Emilia remained still. In less than 24 hours, she had hit rock bottom, and now she was preparing to return, as the one in charge. And this time, she wasn't coming back to stay silent. The next morning, Emilia stood at the door of Lancaster Grill, clutching the strap of her bag, her chest rising and falling in the cold morning air. The pale light of dawn cast a thin mist on the glass windows, reflecting her image, not the humble waitress from the day before. Today she was back, not to serve coffee, but to lead. Emilia took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The familiar scent of coffee and pastries greeted her. The sound of spoons against plates rang out as on any other morning. But this time, as she entered, every eye turned to her. Claudia turned from the register, her eyes wide in disbelief. Lucas, mid-laugh with a kitchen hand, froze when he saw Emilia. The air thickened. Emilia said nothing. She calmly placed her bag on the counter, the gesture firm, like a declaration that needed no words. Claudia blinked, breaking the silence. What are you doing here? Emilia smiled faintly. You'll find out in a moment. The office door swung open. Richard Lorenz appeared, composed, sharp-eyed, scanning the room. Everyone fell silent. Good morning, he said clearly. We have a few changes today. His gaze landed on Martin, the former manager, who had just stepped out of the office, papers in hand. His face darkened the moment he saw Emilia. Martin, Richard said plainly, we won't be needing you anymore. Effective immediately. Martin froze, speechless. What? Claudia gasped, nearly shouting. Lucas took a step back, his face going pale. This is Emilia Novak, Richard continued, the new manager of Lancaster Grill. Silence swallowed the room. Claudia's mouth hung open. Lucas clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. A young line cook in the back let out a stifled laugh, as if unable to believe his ears. Emilia turned to Claudia and Lucas. Awkward, huh? Claudia flushed red, about to protest, but Richard cut her off. If anyone has a problem with this change, the door is open. No one moved. Emilia stepped behind the counter and slowly removed her coat. The tension lingered, but this time, she didn't waver. She was no longer the girl who got fired for being kind. Now she was the one setting the standard, and every eye would have to learn to look at her with respect. The first weeks under Emilia Novak's leadership were anything but easy. She had expected resistance. In fact, she welcomed it. The cold silence from Claudia, the heavy footsteps and permanent frown from Lucas, the whispered remarks from two former night shift staff, all of it seemed designed to test her resolve every single day. Claudia spoke only when she had to. At work, she no longer faked cheerful smiles but adopted a detached, indifferent attitude. Lucas clearly waited for Emilia to slip up, watching her closely whenever she reviewed receipts or coordinated with the kitchen. Some didn't need time to decide. Two former employees quit within the first week. They offered no explanation, and none was needed. Emilia simply watched them walk out, neither stopping them nor regretting it. She wasn't there to make friends. She was there to change things. She observed, she listened. She didn't scream at the staff or threaten to fire them. Instead, she set a standard, not through words, but through actions. When an elderly customer sat waiting without service, it was Emilia who brought the menu. When the kitchen ran behind, she jumped in to plate orders and organize the flow. She didn't flinch at getting her hands greasy or staining her uniform with sauce. And gradually, some started to notice. Change began with the ones no one paid much attention to, like Yannick, the quiet kitchen assistant who attended night classes. One evening, after his shift, he walked up to the counter, shyly. "Did you really fire Martin because he discriminated against a customer?" Emilia looked up. "What do you think?" Yannick hesitated, then nodded. "If that's true, I think it was right." She smiled. "Then I hope you'll help keep this place worth that decision." From then on, things began to shift. Not everyone adapted, but some began to follow the new rhythm. Regulars who were once ignored were now greeted with genuine smiles. Suggestions from the kitchen staff weren't dismissed. And skeptical looks from first-time customers began turning into nods and thank yous. Emilia knew there was still much to do. But each morning she walked through the door, she felt something new, something she had never known here before. Hope. The first few weeks under Emilia Novak's leadership were anything but easy. She had anticipated resistance. She even welcomed it. The cold silence of Claudia, Lucas's heavy footsteps and permanent frown, the whispers from two veteran night shift workers, all of it seemed intent on testing her resolve, every single day. Claudia only spoke when absolutely necessary. At work, she no longer wore the fake cheerful smile but instead adopted a distant, indifferent attitude. Lucas clearly waited for Emilia to make a mistake, quietly observing her every time she checked receipts or coordinated with the kitchen. Some didn't need time to decide. Two employees quit within the first week. They gave no reason, and didn't need to. Emilia simply watched them walk out the door, made no effort to stop them, and felt no regret. She wasn't there to make friends. She was there to make a change. She observed, listened. She didn't shout at the staff or threaten to fire anyone. Instead, she set a standard, not with words, but with action. When an elderly guest sat waiting with no service, it was Emilia who brought the menu. When the kitchen fell behind, she jumped in to help plate and organize orders. She didn't mind getting her hands greasy or her uniform stained with sauce. And gradually, some began to notice. Change began with those who were often overlooked, like Yannick, the young prep cook who studied at night. One day, at the end of his shift, he came to the counter and asked shyly, "Did you really fire Martin just because he discriminated against a customer?" Emilia looked up. "What do you think?" Yannick hesitated, then nodded. "If that's true, then I think it was worth it." She smiled. "Then I hope you'll help keep this place worthy of that decision." From then on, things began to shift. Not everyone adapted, but some started to follow the new rhythm. Regular customers who were once ignored were now greeted with genuine smiles. Feedback from the kitchen staff was no longer dismissed. And the doubtful looks from first-time guests began to be replaced with nods and thank yous. Emilia knew there was still work to do. But each time she walked through the door in the morning, she felt something she never had before, hope. One late afternoon, when the restaurant had begun to quiet down and the golden hour sunlight streamed through the windows, Emilia was seated at a table near the register, reviewing receipts and the shift schedule. The atmosphere in the diner had changed, still busy, but no longer tense. The doorbell chimed softly. Emilia looked up. A tall man stepped inside, brown trench coat, gray tie, silver hair at his temples. It was him. Richard Langford. Emilia stood up immediately. "Good afternoon," she said calmly. "Here to inspect your investment?" Richard offered a smile tinged with pride. "I came to witness a turning point." He looked around. The place hadn't changed, but the way employees and customers looked at each other had. The tension that once simmered beneath the surface was gone. "Seems a lot calmer than the last time I sat here," he remarked. Emilia nodded. "We're still adjusting. A few people left. A few started listening. And a few are learning how to serve with heart." Richard chuckled softly. "That sounds like someone who's been managing for years." "Not quite a month," she replied. "But easily the longest month I've ever lived here." He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "And do you regret it?" Emilia was quiet for a moment. Then she shook her head. "Not once." Richard nodded slowly, thoughtful. "You know, the day you got fired, I thought, if she walks away, I'd understand. But you didn't walk away. You kept going, even without knowing what was ahead. That's why I chose you." Emilia smiled. "Because I wasn't afraid?" "No," he said. "Because you were afraid, but did it anyway." They sat together in silence for a while. Then Richard stood up and placed a folder on the table. "This is the official contract," he said. "Lancaster Grill is now yours, not just as a manager, but with full operational control. I'll be stepping back. You're the right person for this." Emilia's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" Richard looked her in the eye. "I built this place to make a profit. You made it a place worth returning to." She didn't respond, only nodded, hands trembling slightly as she took the file. As Richard turned to leave, he added, "And don't let anyone like Tom ever step through that door again." Emilia watched him go, her gaze filled with resolve. "No one brings the old ways back," she thought to herself. One late afternoon at the beginning of the week, as the diner began to quiet down and the last golden rays of sunlight streamed through the windows, Emilia sat at a table near the register, reviewing receipts and shift schedules. The atmosphere had changed, calm without tension, busy without chaos. The soft chime of the front door rang out. Emilia looked up. A tall figure stepped in, brown trench coat, gray tie, silver hair at the temples. It was him. Richard Langford. Emilia stood up immediately. "Good afternoon," she said calmly. "Are you here to check on your investment?" Richard smiled with a hint of pride. "I came to witness a turning point." His gaze swept across the room. The diner looked the same, but the expressions of both staff and customers were different. The quiet strain that once lingered had vanished. "It looks a lot more peaceful than the last time I sat here," he remarked. Emilia nodded. "We're still making adjustments. A few people left. A few started listening. And a few are learning to serve with heart." Richard let out a soft chuckle. "You sound like you've been managing for years." "Not quite a month," she replied, "but it's been the longest month I've ever had here." He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "And do you regret it?" Emilia paused for a moment, then shook her head. "Not once." Richard nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "You know, the day you were fired, I thought, if she walks away, I'd understand. But you didn't turn back. You kept going, even without knowing what lay ahead. That's why I chose you." Emilia smiled. "Because I wasn't afraid?" "No," he said. "Because you were, but you did it anyway." They sat in silence for a while. Then Richard stood, placing a folder on the table. "This is the official contract," he said. "Lancaster Grill is now yours, not just as manager, but with full operational control. I'll be stepping back. You're better suited for it than I ever was." Emilia's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" Richard looked her straight in the eye. "I built this place to make a profit. You've made it a place worth returning to." She didn't respond, only nodded. Her hand trembled slightly as she took the file. As Richard turned to leave, he added, "And don't let anyone like Tom ever step through that door again." Emilia watched him go, her eyes full of quiet resolve. No one brings the old ways back, she thought. The next morning, Emilia arrived at Lancaster Grill earlier than usual. She was no longer just the manager, she was the operator. She unlocked the door and took a deep breath of the lingering scent of coffee and baked butter from the night shift. She sat down at the corner table where elderly customers usually gathered on weekend mornings and opened the leather notebook Richard had left along with the contract. On the first page, handwritten in firm strokes, were the words, "When I step back, what matters isn't who takes over, it's where they take this place."
Lunford.
Emilia pressed her lips together and flipped to the next page, a detailed expansion plan, complete with budget lines, hiring goals, and the names of 3 potential franchise locations. She inhaled deeply. This was no longer just a humble diner nestled in a city street. This was the beginning of a network, and she was laying its foundation. Footsteps echoed behind her. Noah, the young waiter, poked his head out from the kitchen. "Emilia? There's someone here asking about a job." She stood up. "Let them in." A young woman in her 20s with curly brown hair entered, eyes hesitant. "My name's Sophie. I heard this place changed." Emilia smiled. "Change is necessary if we want to live kindly. Have you worked in service before?" "I have. But my old place said I was too sensitive. I used to stand up for customers." Emilia looked her in the eye, firm yet gentle. "Here, kindness isn't weakness. It's a requirement." Sophie nodded, her eyes flickering with a trust that had likely been buried beneath too many rejections from the old world. Emilia handed her a form. "You start your trial week today." After Sophie came others, a chef fired for challenging a previous manager, an older woman rejected by other restaurants for being over 50, a foreign student whose English wasn't fluent but whose eyes lit up when he talked about the menu. Emilia welcomed them all. Lancaster Grill was no longer just a restaurant. It was a place that returned dignity to those who had been underestimated. A living proof that doing the right thing, even when it hurts at first, can open paths few ever dare to imagine. One afternoon, after the lunch rush had quieted, Beth came back. Not to ask for her job, but to eat. She quietly ordered the pot roast and sat near the door, never looking Emilia's way. Emilia walked over, not bitter, not cold. "You still remember how to order," she said softly. "That's good." Beth nodded. "I saw the article." "What article?" "The one about Lancaster Grill." "About how it's changed," Beth said, her hand tightening around her spoon. "I used to think this place was just a diner. But turns out it takes more than just food," Emilia finished the thought. Beth didn't reply. But as she left, she placed an extra $10 tip on the table. One rainy evening in Columbus, as light drops tapped gently on the streets, Emilia sat alone after closing time. Most of the lights in Lancaster Grill were off, save for the soft golden glow in the kitchen reflecting off the warm red brick walls. Beside her sat a closed ledger, a steaming cup of Earl Grey, and an envelope resting on the table. It was a letter from a national non-profit organization, an invitation to speak at a conference on equity in the service industry workplace. Someone had submitted her name. Perhaps it was Richard. Or maybe a customer who had once been moved by the way she treated them as a person, not just a payment. She let out a quiet laugh. Who would have thought, a waitress once fired for being too kind, now invited to speak to industry leaders about workplace culture? The kitchen door creaked open. Noah poked his head through. "Emilia, can I ask you something?" "Of course." He stepped in, holding a piece of paper, a scholarship application. "I'm applying to study hospitality management. They're asking for a letter of recommendation. If you think I deserve it." Emilia stood up, said nothing, and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'll write that letter. And I'll tell the truth, you're exactly the kind of person every restaurant needs." Noah nodded and stepped out. Before closing the door, he turned back and smiled. "I know no one ever says this to you, but you changed our lives." The door shut. Emilia stood still. That wasn't what she thought she'd hear when this all began. She had only wanted to keep a job. Then, she fought for fairness. But what she ended up doing was sowing something deeper, a return of faith, in kindness, in justice, in human worth. The next morning, Lancaster Grill was as busy as any weekend. But alongside the good food and loyal regulars, there was now something intangible, yet unmistakable: dignity. An old man once ignored by Beth now sat with a hot coffee and the morning paper, brought by Noah. A same-sex couple walked in for breakfast and weren't met with wary stares. A clumsy new waitress was gently helped by colleagues instead of being mocked. And at the center of it all was Emilia, no longer the girl who once shrank in the face of injustice, but a leader who rose from what the world often mistook for weakness: compassion. Richard dropped by, as he often did now, and simply nodded in place of praise. And Emilia understood. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. The world around her was already speaking on her behalf. This story didn't end with an article, an award, or a standing ovation. It ended with people stepping into Lancaster Grill a little heavier, and walking out with something the world too often forgets. Kindness is never wasted.